So unlike almost all exhibitions here at the gallery, this collaboration between Marcel Dzama and Raymond Pettibon began as a book, really as a zine. And I'm holding here the second printing of the zine, which was produced in an edition of 500 for the opening of this show. But the first printing really was for the New York Art Book Fair, and we were sort of thinking about projects that we could put together. I knew Ray was a big fan of Marcel's, and I knew that Marcel was obviously a big fan of Ray's work as well. So at some point, I think maybe I suggested to Raymond and to Marcel independently, sort of trying to play them toward one another, as it were, that a collaboration would be a good idea. Raymond brought like 92 unfinished drawings to the gallery space and essentially handed them off to Marcel. Marcel eventually ended up taking those drawings to his studio and producing the first round of collaborative work. Initially, it was just images. It was a shorter one, maybe 25 pages. I mean, we sold all 200 copies in like, an hour and a half or something like that. So it was clear that there was excitement around the project. In the first iteration, they worked almost in a sort of exquisite corpse manner. So they took each other's work and completed it without really coming back together. So it was really at the very end that one saw these finished works, some of which had been completed by Marcel and some of which had been completed by Raymond. I guess then at some meeting we sort of looked at some of the pictures from the booth, and the idea was floated that we turn this into an actual exhibition. Then in a sort of flurry leading right up to the opening of the show, they came into the space and they made essentially an additional 35 works in the space. And so the spirit of collaboration, the spirit of kind of making something loose and quick and very present, I think is very appealing to both of them. They were really excited at the opportunity to do something that was less premeditated. Ways in which I see them having sort of brought things out of one another is less in a kind of stylistic imposition. I don't think either artist actually changed his or her style. I think you very much see the marks of the style of each artist in the work. That's the irony of this title, which they came up with, Forgetting the Hand. Because of course you come in here and the first thing that you think is which hand produced which part of which work. You just want to discover the hand as you go through it. They were really accepting of each other's tropes or themes, and there are a lot of objects or figures or characters that are more common to one artist's work that the other artist is in fact sort of accepting into their practice. And so one example is the archer, which is sort of a common motif in Marcel's work, which you see Ray taking pains to really illustrate and write text for. The other thing that I think we see a lot of are waves. I mean, that's really sort of Marcel's cutouts that are populating as surfers that wave. And the wave, of course, is quintessentially Raymond. Not only is Marcel accepting the wave, but Raymond is really including Marcel in the production of these waves. It's not so much to me a sort of question of style changes, but much more a question of sort of motif or thematic acceptance and a kind of mutual acceptance or reciprocal acceptance that I think characterizes the collaboration. It also differentiates it from the collaborations where there often seems to be a tension, where there's a sort of fight over territory, where I think each artist wants to establish a kind of dominion over the ground that's available and really mark it as their own work. And I think here the attempt is almost the opposite, is to sort of say, how can I accommodate my style to the themes and motifs that are most comfortable or common in the other artist's work? And the last one is actually the handwriting. I think throughout you see each artist attempting to mimic or mirror the handwriting. And that's the moment where actually theme and style, I mean, for Raymond, handwriting is almost sort of its own theme, as it were, but of course very much a stylistic element. And so there, maybe in Marcel's assumption of that theme or style, you do see a kind of stylistic slip. And I think that's quite beautiful too, but very organic and very open. Especially when you look at the collages, there's a real sense of openness that this was made for and sort of out of the pleasure of making work with an artist that one admires, and not so much at the behest of a major institution saying, produce for us a show. We were all shocked that it became such a sort of formidable standalone exhibition when the first iteration had literally just been a sort of series of works on a wall behind our art fair booth. When I first graduated, I went to the West Coast and actually worked on a project on Jason Rhodes. So I was had been deputized by the gallery to sort of do this oral history project. I think it was also in some ways an excuse to move out there for a little while. And then I actually taught. I taught 7th grade English in Harlem for a year at a success school, which was grueling, but also very beautiful. You know, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. I have only respect for the people who do it. I wanted to get back. I had still been writing about art and thinking about art. I felt this sort of draw back to the things I had studied, literature and philosophy, and then the things around which I'd grown up, visual art. And I didn't have outlets for those directions through the teaching. I mean, I will say that the most amazing thing that happens when you teach, besides getting to know sort of amazing kids, is being exposed to tons of different people. You're forced to understand different personalities in a way that I think very few professions ask you. I had been much more, maybe not misanthropic, but certainly not as able to sort of navigate the worlds of different people as effectively until I did that year of teaching. And I think that any project that sort of spans different cultural touchstones, as it were, requires a sort of sensitivity to the different personalities and an ability to understand what each party needs or wants from a situation, and also just genuinely a desire to know those things, because one doesn't want to do a project like that that's then feels like it's manipulative to one of the parties. I mean, that's not at all exciting. That's the worst. And so I think the teaching thing and the oral history thing, ironically, both put me in touch with a broad, a cross-section of tons of different people from tons of different worlds. And I think finding comfort zones for having conversations was the sort of most powerful lesson I learned in all of that. And I think it's also the one that serves me the best, because many of the things that I end up doing, besides the sort of editing at the desk, which happens obviously a lot of the time, is sort of conducting or facilitating conversations between parties that maybe wouldn't have been used to speaking to one another. Being able to let those conversations happen is an incredibly, in its small way, can be a very beautiful and quite fulfilling thing to do. And I think it came right out of teaching and parent-teacher conferences, maybe.